Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Episode 131 coming at you, hot off the presses.
Hey, Jenny. Hey, listeners. Yep, ready to dive into something. Well, something that's been brewing in the AI pot for a bit. Feels like you can't blink without missing a new ingredient being thrown in, right?
Seriously, it's a full-time job just keeping track. So, Mark, I know we've both been hearing whispers, maybe more like loud stage whispers, about AI assistants getting smarter, especially when it comes to digging up information. What have you got for us today?
Right? The pace is just intense. So today, I wanted to focus on Google's neck of the woods, specifically Gemini. And even more specifically, a feature within Gemini Advanced called Deep Research. It's aiming to be quite a bit more than just your average search query.
Okay, deep research. Sounds substantial. Not just spitting back the top 10 links then? How is it actually different from, just Googling something?
Exactly. Think of it less like asking a librarian for a book list and more like handing off a complex research project brief to a very fast, very diligent research assistant. Deep Research uses what's called Agentic AI.
Agentic AI. Okay, unpack that for me. Agentic makes it sound like it has agency, it acts on its own?
Pretty much. That's the core idea. You give it a complex query, maybe something like, analyze the potential impact of quantum computing on current encryption standards. Instead of just listing articles, it's designed to act somewhat autonomously. It breaks that big question down into smaller, logical subtasks. It figures out what times it needs to know and asterisk how to find it.
Okay, hang on. So it's like it creates its own little research plan? Like, step 1, define quantum computing basics. Step 2, identify current encryption standards. Step 3, find papers discussing quantum threats. That sort of thing?
You got it. It employs multi-step reasoning and planning. It might first identify the key concepts, then search for foundational explanations, then look for expert analyses on the intersection of those concepts, maybe search for recent research papers or patents, perhaps even look for contrasting viewpoints. All without needing step-by-step instructions from you after the initial prompt.
That times different. It's moving beyond pattern-matching keywords to actually structuring the inquiry. And I assume it's plugging into Google's massive search index to do all this?
Oh, absolutely. That's the powerhouse behind it. It can sift through potentially hundreds of web pages, documents, PDFs, whatever Google search can see. It pulls relevant information, tries to understand the context, and synthesizes it. The goal isn't just a list of sources, but a comprehensive, structured report answering your complex query.
Wow. Okay, I can immediately see the appeal for certain tasks. The research you mentioned cites examples like a grad student tracking sensor trends, or maybe a startup analyzing competitors. Stuff that usually involves drowning in browser tabs.
Precisely. Tasks that normally take hours, maybe even days, of manual searching, reading, note-taking, and synthesizing. The idea is to drastically shorten that cycle.
My brain definitely starts to short-circuit after about, 15 tabs? Maybe 20 on a good day? So, if it's planning, searching across hundreds of sources, synthesizing, how does it keep track of everything and maintain coherence, especially on a really broad topic?
That's where one of the technical underpinnings comes in: context management. Gemini Advanced, which houses Deep Research, boasts a context window of around 1 million tokens.
1 million tokens. Right, translate that from I speak to human speak, Mark. Is that like a lot of words?
Haha, fair enough. Think of tokens as pieces of words, roughly. So 1 million tokens is substantial. It's like the SEI being able to keep the entire text of a very thick novel, maybe even a couple of them, in its active working memory all at once. For comparison, many other models operate with much smaller windows.
So that big memory lets it see the connections between source A it found early on and source Z it found much later?
That's the key benefit. It allows it to maintain context, track connections, and cross-reference information across a vast amount of processed text during that deep research dive. It helps ensure the final output feels like a coherent narrative or analysis, not just disconnected snippets glued together. It's trying to mimic, or at least significantly aid, that human analytical process of connecting the dots.
Okay, it sounds powerful on paper. But you know me, Mark, I always wonder how it stacks up in the real world. There are other players in this answer engine space, right? Like Perplexity AI comes to mind. How does deep research compare?
Good question, and it's definitely a comparison people are making. The research mentions some initial benchmarks. For generating a report, one test showed Gemini Deep Research taking maybe around 4 minutes, while Perplexity might average closer to 3 minutes for similar-ish tasks.
So Perplexity might have a slight speed edge in some cases?
Potentially, depending on the query complexity and what exactly is being measured. But speed isn't the only metric, right? Depth is another factor. Gemini is often described as potentially scanning up to, say, 200 sources for a deep dive, while Perplexity sometimes uses vaguer terms like hundreds. It's hard to make direct comparisons without standardized tests.
And then there's the elephant in the room. Accuracy. If it's synthesizing potentially hundreds of sources, how reliable is the final report? Are we getting synthesized facts? Or convincingly written confabulations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And maybe the billion-token question for Gemini. The research does point to some specific benchmarks where Gemini performs well. For example, on datasets like Simple QA, designed for fact-based question answering, it achieved high accuracy scores. But, and it's a big but,
I sense a but coming.
other tests paint a more complex picture. One evaluation mentioned, amusingly called Humanity's Last Exam, you gotta appreciate the drama, apparently showed OpenAI's comparable technology slightly ahead in some areas, so performance seems context-dependent.
So it's not a clear win across the board. Performance varies depending on the specific task or benchmark being used?
It appears so. And this brings us to a crucial point from the research. The risk of inaccuracies isn't just about getting a fact wrong. It's also about asterisk bias. If the AI is trained on biased data, or if it pulls from biased sources during its research,
It could amplify those biases in its synthesized report, presenting them as neutral fact. That's concerning. How is Google addressing that?
it's a massive challenge for the entire field. Google leverages its experience in search quality and tries to build in mechanisms for fact-checking and identifying reliable sources. But, realistically, no automated system is foolproof, especially when dealing with nuanced or controversial topics where source bias is prevalent.
So the bottom line is, even with a sophisticated tool like this, the user still needs their critical thinking cap firmly strapped on. You can't just blindly trust the output.
Absolutely. It's an assistant, maybe a very powerful one, but not an oracle. Verification and critical evaluation remain essential skills, which actually ties into the ethical dimension too, something the research rightly flags.
Right, ethics. Beyond accuracy and bias, there's the whole issue of how this information is gathered. I remember reading about Perplexity facing some legal challenges regarding copyright. Accusations of scraping content without proper attribution, maybe even bypassing paywalls?
Yeah, that's become a significant point of discussion and a potential differentiator. The research highlights this contrast. Perplexity ran into trouble for allegedly using publisher content in ways that the publishers weren't happy about, sometimes presenting information without clear links back to the original source or appropriate credit. That understandably ruffles feathers, especially for news organizations and content creators who rely on subscriptions or ad revenue.
So how is Google navigating this minefield with Gemini Deep Research? Are they taking a different approach?
It seems they are trying to. Google appears to be leaning heavily on establishing partnerships with publishers, potentially involving revenue sharing or licensing agreements. The idea is to create a more symbiotic relationship, accessing content ethically and potentially compensating creators, rather than just scraping.
That sounds, well, more sustainable and, frankly, more ethical in the long run. Working times with times the ecosystem rather than just extracting from it. Though, I wonder if that creates its own issues, like favoring larger publishers who can strike deals.
That's a valid point. It could potentially reinforce existing imbalances if smaller creators or niche publications are left out of these partnership deals. It's complex, but avoiding the direct legal confrontations that others have faced seems like a strategic priority for Google.
Okay, another practical angle. Cost. You mentioned this lives in Gemini Advanced, which requires a subscription, right? Unlike some tools like Perplexity that have free tiers.
Correct. Gemini Advanced is part of the Google One AI Premium plan. And this raises the accessibility question highlighted in the research. Does putting such a powerful research tool behind a paywall risk creating an information divide?
Exactly. Like, academics or businesses with budgets might gain a significant advantage, while students, independent researchers, or smaller organizations might be left behind if they can't afford it. We see this pattern often with specialized tools.
It's a definite concern. While free tools exist, they might not offer the same depth, accuracy, or ethical sourcing. It becomes a trade-off between cost, capability, and, potentially, information quality or ethical usage. Something listeners might want to weigh in on, actually.
Ooh, good idea. Maybe we should ask them. Listeners, what do you think? We could run a poll. Do you think subscription costs for advanced AI research tools will create a significant information gap, or will free alternatives keep pace? Find the poll on our socials.
Love it. Okay, so looking ahead, Jenny, beyond the current state, what's next for deep research? Is it going to stay confined to the Gemini Advanced Web Interface?
Well, the hints suggest expansion is planned. There's talk about integrating this deeper research capability into Google Workspace, maybe via mobile apps too. The timeline floated was potentially early next year, like Q1 2025.
Workspace integration makes a lot of sense. Imagine starting a research brief directly within a Google Doc, having Gemini populate it, and then collaborating on refining it right there.
Exactly. The research even mentioned ideas like real-time collaborative features, where multiple team members could potentially guide the AI's research process together within docs or sheets. It could be quite useful for group projects or business reports.
And didn't I see something about audio summaries too?
Yes! The ability to generate an audio overview of the research findings, so you could, listen to your market analysis briefing while you're making coffee or commuting, making the output more versatile.
It definitely feels like the trend is moving towards AI assistants that are less like standalone chatbots and more like deeply integrated partners in our workflows, handling these more complex multi-step tasks.
It's a significant shift from just asking simple questions to delegating complex knowledge work. So, final thoughts, Mark? Is Gemini Deep Research the future of how we find and synthesize information?
I think it's a strong contender for asterisk, a time's future, certainly. It showcases a powerful new capability, automating in-depth research and synthesis. That core value proposition is strong, but as we've discussed, it's not without its challenges. Ensuring accuracy, navigating the ethical tightrope of content usage, mitigating bias, and addressing accessibility.
And the crucial need for users to remain critical thinkers. It's a tool, a potentially very useful one, but it requires oversight, judgment, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Maybe we could even do a listener challenge segment sometime. Have listeners submit tough research questions and see how these tools handle them?
I like that idea. Puts them to the test. But yes, couldn't agree more on the critical thinking part. It's impressive technology, but mindful usage is key.
A fascinating space to keep watching, that's for sure. Thanks for breaking down Gemini Deep Research for us, Mark.
Anytime, Jenny. Always interesting exploring the frontiers of AI.
All right, listeners. That wraps up episode 131. Let us know your thoughts on these AI research assistants. Have you tried Gemini Advanced or Perplexity? What are your experiences? And don't forget to check out that poll on our social channels about the cost factor. Find us everywhere you normally do. Until next time.
Bye, everyone. Stay curious.